We think Isabella would be perfect for Jacob, Mom said, her words hitting me like ice water in July. I was standing right there in our living room, holding the tea tray I'd brought for Jacob's family, my hands trembling so badly the cups were rattling against the saucers. The sound seemed impossibly loud in the sudden silence that followed Mom's declaration. Jacob's mother smiled that polite smile wealthy people perfect, the one that says they're pleased but not surprised. Isabella is lovely, she agreed, her eyes sliding past me like I was part of the furniture. Such a beautiful girl. Beautiful. Always beautiful. Never smart, never kind, never anything that mattered beyond what people could see. I set the tray down on the coffee table with more force than necessary, the small crash making everyone look at me for exactly 3 seconds before their attention returned to Isabella, who was blushing prettily and playing with her hair. "Elena, dear, could you bring some more napkins?" Dad asked without even looking at me. Could I bring more napkins? Could I serve tea to the family discussing my sister's future husband? Could I smile and nod while they planned a life that should have been mine? Because here's what nobody knew. Jacob and I had been talking for months. Not the formal, chaperoned conversations they thought appropriate, but real talks. Late-night texts about books we'd read, about dreams that felt too big for our small town, about feeling like we were both swimming upstream in families that had already decided who we were supposed to be. "The writing's beautiful," he'd texted me just last week about a poem I'd shared. "You see the world in a way that makes me want to see it too." Now he was sitting on our couch, his hands folded carefully in his lap, nodding as my parents extolled Isabella's virtues like she was a prize mare at auction. He hadn't looked at me once since his family arrived. I walked to the kitchen on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. The napkins were in the drawer next to the sink, the same drawer where I kept the sticky notes I used to leave myself reminders. Finish the college application. Call about the scholarship. Don't let them make you invisible. Too late for that last one. I could hear them through the thin walls, their voices carrying that excited energy that comes with successful matchmaking. Isabella's laugh, light and musical, the kind that makes everyone smile. The kind I'd practiced in mirrors for hours when I was 13, trying to figure out what made it so different from mine. "She's got such a gentle nature," Mom was saying. "Perfect for a wife." Gentle nature. Translation: Isabella never argued, never questioned, never wanted anything more than what was offered to her. Unlike me, with my messy ambitions and inconvenient opinions and stubborn refusal to disappear quietly into the background. I pressed my palms against the cool granite countertop, trying to steady myself. The kitchen smelled like the cardamom tea I'd made. Isabella's favorite, not mine. Everything in this house was measured against Isabella's preferences, Isabella's comfort, Isabella's happiness. When had I stopped mattering? I could pinpoint it, actually. It was 3 years ago when Isabella turned 18 and suddenly transformed from my awkward little sister into this creature of ethereal beauty that made strangers stop on the street. That's when the proposals started coming, when every conversation at family dinners became about Isabella's future, Isabella's prospects, Isabella's inevitable marriage to someone worthy of her perfection. And I became the helper, the one who knew exactly how Isabella liked her tea, who could fix her hair when she couldn't get it right, who could be counted on to fade into the background and make everyone else shine brighter. "Elena?" Dad's voice called from the living room. "The napkins?" I grabbed the cloth napkins from the drawer, the good ones, because Jacob's family was important enough for the good ones, and walked back into what felt like my own execution. Jacob was looking at Isabella now, really looking at her, and something in my chest cracked like old plaster. She was radiant under his attention, glowing in that way that made everyone want to protect her, cherish her, choose her. I handed the napkins to Jacob's mother, and for just a moment, our eyes met. There was something there, not recognition exactly, but a flicker of... what? Curiosity? Regret? "Thank you," he said quietly, and it was the first time he'd spoken directly to me since arriving. "You're welcome," I managed, my voice sounding strange and hollow. Isabella was telling a story about the charity work she'd been doing, reading to children at the library, because of course she was. Sweet, selfless Isabella, who volunteered her time while I was buried in textbooks, fighting for scholarships that might get me out of this town, this life, this suffocating certainty that I would always be second choice. Elena volunteers too, Isabella said suddenly, and everyone turned to look at me with that polite interest people show when they're trying to be inclusive but would rather not be interrupted. Oh, Jacob's mother asked. I tutor kids in math and science, I said, hating how my voice sounded, too quiet, too eager for approval. At the community center. How nice, she replied, the words meaning nothing. How nice. Like my work was a cute hobby instead of the thing that had gotten 12 kids from the worst part of town into high school honors programs. Like the letters from parents thanking me for helping their children believe they were smart enough for college were just pleasant decorations in my room. Elena's the smart one, Dad said with that indulgent smile that made me want to scream. Always has her nose in a book. The smart one. As if intelligence was my consolation prize for not being beautiful. As if being smart was somehow less valuable than being decorative. Jacob shifted in his seat and I caught him looking at me again. This time, he didn't look away immediately. What are you reading now? He asked. The question was so unexpected that I almost didn't answer. When was the last time someone had asked me about my reading? Not to make polite conversation, but because they actually wanted to know? Neruda, I said before I could stop myself. 20 love poems and a song of despair. Something changed in his expression. I love Neruda. Love is so short. Forgetting is so long. The quote hung in the air between us like a secret. I knew that poem. I'd read it so many times the pages were soft with handling. And I'd thought about texting him that exact line a dozen times but never had the courage. Elena reads poetry, Isabella said with that gentle laugh that meant she found it charmingly eccentric. I never could understand it. Of course she couldn't. Poetry required you to feel things deeply, to sit with discomfort, to find beauty in pain. Isabella had never needed poetry because she'd never needed to transform her suffering into something bearable. Poetry is important, Jacob said, still looking at me. It helps us understand what we can't say ourselves. My heart was doing something painful and desperate in my chest. This was the Jacob I'd been talking to in texts, the one who understood that words could be lifelines, that books could be friends when people failed you. But then his mother cleared her throat, and the moment shattered like glass. Well, she said briskly, we should discuss the details. Jacob, your father and I think Isabella would make a wonderful addition to our family. Addition to their family. Like she was a piece of furniture they were acquiring. I watched Jacob's face close off. Watched him retreat back into the polite stranger who'd walked into our house an hour ago. He nodded at his mother, then looked at Isabella with what might have been fondness or might have been resignation. I'd be honored, he said to Isabella, and she clapped her hands together like a child receiving an unexpected gift. I stood up so quickly my chair scraped against the floor. Excuse me, I muttered, and fled to my room before anyone could see the tears that were threatening to spill over. My room was the same as always. Books stacked everywhere. A desk covered in half-finished scholarship applications. Walls lined with quotes I'd copied out in careful handwriting. She was powerful not because she wasn't scared, but because she went on so strongly, despite the fear. Maya Angelou. The words mocked me now. I sat on my bed and pulled out my phone, scrolling through months of text conversations with Jacob. Messages about everything and nothing. His confession that he felt trapped by his family's expectations. My admission that I sometimes felt invisible in my own life. Do you ever feel like you're living someone else's story? I'd asked him once. Every day, he'd replied. But when I talk to you, I remember what my story might actually be. What my story might actually be. Past tense now, apparently. I heard voices downstairs. Happy, excited voices making plans that didn't include me. The sound of my sister's future being arranged while I sat alone in my room, surrounded by all the dreams I'd been too afraid to voice. My phone buzzed with a text. For one wild, desperate moment, I thought it might be Jacob. It was my best friend Mia. "How did it go? Did you finally tell him how you feel?" I stared at the message until the words blurred. How did it go? It went exactly like everything else in my life. The beautiful sister got chosen, and I got to watch from the sidelines, pretending it didn't matter. But this time, something felt different. This time, the pain wasn't just disappointment. It was rage. Clean, burning rage at a world that had decided my value before I'd even had a chance to prove it. I looked around my room. At the acceptance letter to the state university I'd hidden from my parents because they'd just worry about the cost. At the scholarship applications they didn't know I'd submitted. At the life I'd been planning in secret while they planned Isabella's life in the open. Maybe it was time to stop being the smart one, the helpful one, the one who faded into the background. Maybe it was time to be the one who left. I pulled out my laptop and opened the email I'd been too scared to send. The subject line read, "Accepting full scholarship offer." My finger hovered over the send button for a long moment. Downstairs, Isabella laughed again, the sound floating up through my closed door like a reminder of everything I'd never be. I hit send. The confirmation email came back within minutes. "Congratulations, Elena. We're thrilled to welcome you to our fall semester program. Please report to campus housing on August 15th. August 15th. 3 weeks away. 3 weeks to figure out how to tell my family I was leaving for a full-ride scholarship they didn't even know I'd applied for. I closed my laptop and lay back on my bed, staring at the ceiling where I'd stuck glow-in-the-dark stars when I was 12. They'd faded now, barely visible even in complete darkness, but I'd never taken them down. Like everything else in this room, they were evidence of a girl who used to believe she could reach for things beyond her grasp. My phone rang. Mia. "Well," she demanded the second I picked up. "Don't leave me hanging. Did Jacob's family come to ask for your hand in marriage like some Victorian novel?" I laughed, but it came out broken. "They asked for Isabella's hand." Silence. Then, "Elena, no. Please tell me you're joking." While I served them tea, on the good china. "Those absolute—" Mia's voice was getting that dangerous edge it got when someone hurt her people. "Elena, I'm coming over." "Don't. They're still downstairs planning the engagement party." "Then I'm definitely coming over. Nobody should have to listen to that alone." The call ended before I could protest. Mia had been my anchor since middle school, the only person who'd ever seemed genuinely baffled by my family's inability to see me. She'd been the one to help me research scholarship programs, to practice interview questions, to believe that wanting more than what I'd been given wasn't selfish. 15 minutes later, she was climbing through my bedroom window like we were still 13 and she was sneaking over for sleepovers. Some things never changed. "Okay," she said, settling cross-legged on my bed. "Tell me everything. And don't you dare try to make this sound like it's not a big deal." So I told her. About Jacob's texts over the past months. About the way he'd looked at me when I mentioned Neruda. About the careful distance he'd maintained once his family arrived. About my parents' casual dismissal, as if my feelings were too unimportant to even consider. "You know what kills me?" I said, picking at my bedspread. "I actually thought, God, I'm so stupid. I thought he might have asked his family to come here for me. All those conversations we had, all those messages about feeling trapped and wanting something real. I thought it meant something." "Maybe it did mean something," Mia said carefully. "Maybe he's just as trapped as you feel. Trapped people don't get to choose my sister while I'm standing right there." Mia was quiet for a moment. "What are you going to do?" I took a breath. "I'm leaving. Full scholarship to state. I accepted it 20 minutes ago." Her eyes went wide. "Elena, that's amazing! When? Why didn't you tell me you'd applied for that?" "Because I didn't think I'd actually get it, and because—" I gestured vaguely toward my closed door, beyond which I could still hear the happy planning voices. Because they would have found a way to make it about Isabella. How she'd miss me, how unfair it was to leave her, how I was being selfish. When do you leave? 3 weeks. Mia whistled low. That's not much time to figure out how to tell them. I'm not telling them. Not until I have to. She gave me that look, the one that meant she thought I was making things harder than they needed to be. Elena. No. My voice was sharper than I'd intended. I'm done trying to manage everyone else's feelings about my life. Done being careful and considerate, and making sure I don't take up too much space. For once, I'm going to do something without asking permission first. The voices downstairs suddenly got louder, followed by the sound of the front door opening and closing. Jacob's family leaving, probably. Plans made. Future secured. Isabella's future, anyway. I should go, Mia said, glancing toward the window. But Elena, I'm proud of you. For the scholarship, for choosing yourself. It's about time. After she left, I sat in the growing darkness and listened to my family celebrate downstairs. Isabella's voice, bright with excitement, talking about wedding plans and dress shopping and how wonderful Jacob's mother had been. Mom and Dad making lists, discussing venues, talking about Isabella's happiness like it was the most important thing in the world. Maybe it was. Maybe that's how families were supposed to work. Everyone focused on the happiness of the most cherished member. I just wished I could remember what it felt like to be cherished. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Is this Elena? This is Jacob. I got your number from Isabella's phone. Can we talk? I stared at the message for a full minute. Then I typed back. I don't think that's a good idea. The response came immediately. Please, there are things I need to explain. Like why you spent months texting me about poetry and dreams and then asked for my sister's hand in marriage. I didn't ask for her hand. My parents did. You didn't exactly object. Can I call you? I looked at my closed door, then at my window where Mia had climbed through just an hour ago. Then I typed, meet me at Riverside Park, 20 minutes. I grabbed my jacket and slipped out the back door while my family was still in planning mode. The park was only a few blocks away, and I'd walked there so many times I could do it in my sleep. It was where I went when the house felt too small, when Isabella's perfection felt too suffocating, when I needed to remember there was a world beyond our 4 walls. Jacob was already there when I arrived, sitting on the bench where I'd spent countless afternoons reading. He looked different somehow, smaller, less sure of himself than he had in our living room. You came, he said when he saw me. I'm here. Talk. He ran a hand through his hair. Elena, I know how this looks. It looks like you lied to me for months while you were planning to marry my sister. I wasn't planning anything. My parents were planning. They've been planning since I turned 25, and they decided it was time for me to settle down with someone appropriate. And Isabella is appropriate. Isabella is... He struggled for words. She's everything they want in a daughter-in-law. Beautiful, agreeable, from a good family. She'll never challenge them or make waves or want anything they're not prepared to give. The words stung even though they weren't about me. So you're marrying her. I don't know. He looked at me then. Really looked at me. Before tonight, I thought I might find a way out of it. Some excuse, some reason to delay. But then I saw you serving tea like you were invisible. And I realized what a coward I've been. What do you mean? I mean, I've been hiding behind text messages and late-night conversations because it was easier than admitting I was falling for someone my family would never accept. The words hit me like a physical blow. Don't what? Don't say things like that now. Not after what happened tonight. Elena, no. I stood up, pacing to the edge of the small pond where ducks sometimes gathered during the day. You don't get to tell me you have feelings for me after you spent an entire evening discussing marriage to my sister. You don't get to make this about your family's expectations when you could have said something, anything, to change what happened tonight. What could I have said? Actually, I'd prefer the other daughter, in front of both families. You could have said you needed time to think. You could have asked to speak to Isabella privately and explained you weren't ready. You could have done anything other than sit there and nod while they planned your life. He was quiet for a long moment. You're right. I know I'm right. So what do we do now? I turned to face him. We don't do anything. You marry Isabella if that's what your family wants. I leave for college in 3 weeks and never look back. You're leaving! Full scholarship. I'll be gone before your engagement party. Something shifted in his expression. Elena, wait. I'm done waiting. The words came out fiercer than I'd intended. I've spent my entire life waiting for someone to choose me, to see me, to think I was worth fighting for. But tonight showed me that I'm never going to be anyone's first choice, so I'm choosing myself. That's not true, isn't it? Your family walked into my house tonight and decided my sister would make a lovely wife, without even considering that there might be another option. My parents helped them make that decision. And you let them. Jacob stood up and moved toward me. Elena, if I could change tonight, but you can't. And even if you could, would you? Really? Would you choose the complicated girl with too many opinions and not enough beauty? Or would you choose the sweet one who'll never question your decisions or want more than you're prepared to give? He didn't answer immediately, and that hesitation was answer enough. That's what I thought, I said softly. It's not that simple. Actually, it is. It's the simplest thing in the world. You choose the person you can't imagine living without, even if it's complicated, even if it's scary, even if it means disappointing people. I started walking back toward the path that led home. Elena, please! I stopped but didn't turn around. Jacob, marry Isabella. She'll make you happy, and she deserves someone who chooses her wholeheartedly. But don't text me anymore. Don't call. Don't make this harder than it already is. The walk home felt like the longest 15 minutes of my life. By the time I reached our street, Jacob's car was gone from the driveway, and the house was quiet. My family had probably gone to bed, exhausted from all the happy planning. I slipped back inside and up to my room, where I found a piece of paper that had been slid under my door. Isabella's handwriting, loopy and careful. Elena, thank you for being so welcoming tonight. I know this changes things between us, but I hope you'll be happy for me. You're going to make such a wonderful sister-in-law. We should go dress shopping this weekend. Love, Bella. Sister-in-law. The word felt like a stone in my throat. I crumpled the note and threw it in my wastebasket, then pulled out my laptop again. If I was leaving in 3 weeks, I had things to do. Arrangements to make, a life to plan, a future to build that had nothing to do with anyone else's expectations. For the first time in years, I was going to write my own story. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of Isabella humming in the shower. Wedding songs, probably. I lay in bed listening to her voice echo off the bathroom tiles, pure and sweet and completely unconscious of the wreckage it represented for me. I grabbed my phone and started making lists. Things I needed to do before leaving. Finalize housing arrangements. Figure out what to pack. Decide what to say to the kids I tutored. Things I wanted to do. Absolutely nothing that involved wedding planning or dress shopping or pretending to be happy about my sister marrying the first person I'd ever loved. Elena! Mom's voice drifted up from the kitchen. Breakfast! I pulled on jeans and a sweater and headed downstairs, where I found the entire family gathered around the kitchen table like some twisted Norman Rockwell painting. Dad was reading wedding venue reviews aloud from his tablet while Mom made notes in a floral notebook that probably cost more than I spent on books in a month. Oh, good, you're up, Isabella said, bouncing slightly in her chair. Mom and I were just planning our shopping trip for today. We want to look at engagement party dresses. That's nice, I said, pouring myself coffee that tasted like acid in my empty stomach. You're coming with us, of course, Mom added without looking up from her notes. Isabella needs her sister's opinion. Of course I was going. Of course my opinion mattered when it came to helping Isabella look beautiful for her engagement to the man who'd been texting me love quotes just a week ago. Actually, I can't, I said. I promised the Martinez kids I'd help them with their summer reading today. Mom's pen paused. Elena, this is more important than tutoring. It's your sister's engagement party. The Martinez kids' education is important too. Dad looked up from his tablet. Elena, don't be difficult. Family comes first. Family comes first. The phrase that had governed my entire life except family apparently meant Isabella's happiness, Isabella's future, Isabella's everything. I made a commitment, I said quietly. You can reschedule, Isabella said with that gentle smile that meant she genuinely couldn't understand why anyone would prioritize anything over her needs. Please, I really want you there. She did want me there. That was the thing about Isabella. She wasn't malicious or calculating. She genuinely loved me in her limited way, and she genuinely couldn't fathom that her happiness might come at the cost of mine. In her world, there was enough joy to go around, enough love for everyone, because she'd never had to fight for either. Fine, I said, hating myself for the word even as it left my mouth. What time? 10. Isabella clapped her hands together. This is going to be so much fun, just like when we were little and played dress-up. Except when we were little, I'd always been the one helping Isabella into the princess costume while I wore the dragon suit or played the servant. Some things never changed. I spent the morning forcing myself through the motions of normal life. Shower, breakfast, small talk about the weather, while inside I felt like I was watching everything from a great distance. Like I was already gone, the dress shopping was exactly as torturous as I'd expected. Isabella tried on outfit after outfit, each one making her look more radiant than the last, while Mom and the sales assistants cooed over how perfect she looked, how lucky Jacob was, how she was going to be the most beautiful bride. What do you think of this one? Isabella asked, emerging from the dressing room in a flowing blue dress that made her eyes look like sapphires. It's beautiful, I said automatically. You've said that about the last 4 dresses, Mom pointed out. Be more specific. More specific. How was I supposed to be more specific about watching my sister try on clothes for a party celebrating her engagement to the person I loved? The color brings out your eyes, I managed. Doesn't it? Isabella beamed, turning to admire herself in the mirror. Jacob loves blue. Of course he did. I knew that from our conversations, from the way he'd described his favorite painting, a Rothko piece that was mostly blue and made him think about infinity. I'd spent an hour researching Rothko after that text, trying to understand what drew him to that particular shade of possibility. Elena, you should try something on too, the sales assistant suggested. We have some lovely dresses that would complement your sister's. Complement. Not outshine, not compete with, but complement. Always the supporting character in someone else's story. I'm fine, I said. Oh, come on, Isabella said, grabbing my hand. We never shop together anymore. Please. So I found myself in a dressing room, staring at a rack of dresses that had been selected for their ability to make me look nice, but not too nice. Pretty, but not too pretty. Dresses that would ensure I looked appropriate for an engagement party without risking upstaging the guest of honor. I pulled on a simple green dress and looked at myself in the mirror. The girl looking back was a stranger, hollow-eyed and pale, like she'd been drained of something essential. When had I started looking so defeated? Let's see, Isabella called from outside the dressing room. I stepped out, and for a moment, everyone was quiet. Oh, Mom said softly. Elena, you look different, Isabella finished, more grown up somehow. I looked at myself in the 3-way mirror. The dress was simple but well cut, and the color did something interesting to my dark hair and eyes. For the first time in months, I looked like someone worth noticing. It's perfect, the sales assistant said. Very sophisticated. Sophisticated. Not beautiful like Isabella, but sophisticated. I'd take it. We'll take both dresses, Mom announced, pulling out her credit card. On the drive home, Isabella chattered about party plans and guest lists, and whether they should have a string quartet or a pianist. I stared out the window and tried to imagine what I'd be doing in 3 weeks. Unpacking in a dorm room, meeting my roommate, starting a life where nobody knew I was the smart sister, the helpful sister, the invisible sister. "Elena, you're being awfully quiet," Mom said, glancing at me in the rearview mirror. "Just tired," I lied. "Well, perk up. We're having dinner with Jacob's family tonight to finalize the engagement party details." My stomach dropped. "Tonight? Didn't I mention that?" Jacob insisted. He said he wanted to make sure everyone was comfortable with the arrangements. Jacob insisted. What game was he playing now? That evening, I sat through another excruciating dinner where everyone except me seemed delighted to discuss centerpieces and catering menus. Jacob was different tonight. Quieter. More attentive to the conversation, but somehow distant from it. Every so often, I'd catch him looking at me with an expression I couldn't read. "Elena," Jacob's mother said suddenly, "Isabella tells us you're quite the scholar. Any plans for college?" The question hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Isabella looked at me expectantly, and I realized she genuinely didn't know about my scholarship, my plans, my entire future that I'd been building in secret. "I'm considering my options," I said carefully. "She's being modest," Dad jumped in. "Elena's always been our little bookworm, but she's never been very practical about her future. We keep telling her she needs to think about marriage, family, the important things. The important things. Not education, not dreams, not the possibility that I might want something more than what had been pre-selected for me." "Actually," I said, my voice sounding strange and clear in the suddenly quiet room, "I've been accepted to State University on a full academic scholarship. I'll be starting in the fall." The silence that followed was deafening. Isabella's fork clattered against her plate. "Elena," Mom said slowly, "what are you talking about?" "I applied for scholarships last winter. I was accepted to several programs, and I've chosen State. I leave in 2 weeks." 2 weeks? Isabella's voice was small and shocked. But the engagement party is in 3 weeks." "I know." Jacob was staring at me with something that might have been admiration, or might have been horror. His parents looked confused, like they couldn't quite process the idea of someone making major life decisions without family consultation. "Elena," Dad said, his voice carrying that warning tone I knew well, "we need to discuss this privately." "There's nothing to discuss. The decision is made. You can't just leave," Isabella said, and for the first time since I'd known her, she looked genuinely distressed. "You're my sister. You're supposed to be here for everything." "I'm supposed to be a lot of things," I said quietly, "but I've decided to be myself instead." I stood up from the table, my legs surprisingly steady. "If you'll excuse me, I have packing to do." As I walked toward the door, I heard Jacob's voice behind me. "Elena, wait!" I turned back. He was standing now too, his napkin clutched in his hands like a lifeline. "Congratulations," he said simply. "On the scholarship. You deserve it." The words were quiet, but they carried across the silent room like a benediction. For just a moment, I saw the Jacob I'd been talking to in those late-night texts. The one who understood that some dreams were worth fighting for, even when everyone else thought you were crazy. "Thank you," I said, and walked out of the dining room, out of the house, into the night air that suddenly felt like freedom. Behind me, I could hear the explosion beginning. Isabella's confused questions, my parents' angry voices, the sound of a family trying to process the idea that the invisible daughter had been planning her escape all along. But I kept walking, my phone already buzzing with the scholarship coordinator's contact information. I had arrangements to finalize, a future to claim, and exactly 14 days to figure out how to say goodbye to the only life I'd ever known. For the first time in years, I was excited about what came next. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of silent warfare. Mom oscillated between pretending my leaving wasn't happening and staging elaborate guilt campaigns designed to make me stay. Dad retreated into his newspaper and work calls, occasionally emerging to make pointed comments about family loyalty and disappointing everyone. Isabella cried. A lot. But it was the things they didn't say that cut deepest. The way conversations stopped when I entered a room. The way they planned Isabella's engagement party around my absence without ever actually asking if I might change my mind. The way they packed away my childhood like I was already dead to them. I spent most of those days at the community center, throwing myself into tutoring with desperate intensity. The kids there didn't care about family drama or engagement parties or sisters who got chosen over me. They cared about algebra and chemistry and whether they could really make it to college despite everything working against them. Miss Elena, little David Martinez asked during our last session, "Why do you look so sad lately?" I was helping him with fractions and apparently failing to hide the fact that I felt like my own life had been divided into pieces I couldn't make whole again. "I'm not sad," I lied. "I'm excited. I'm starting college soon." "But you're leaving us," his sister Rosa added quietly. She was 14, brilliant, and convinced that people like her didn't get happy endings. "I'm not leaving you. I'm showing you that it's possible to leave." I looked around the small tutoring room where I'd spent 3 years watching kids discover they were smarter than anyone had told them. "Sometimes you have to go away to become who you're supposed to be." Rosa nodded like she understood something the adults in my life couldn't grasp. On my last day at the center, they threw me a party. Homemade cake, construction paper cards with spelling mistakes, and more tears than I'd seen in my own house. Mrs. Rodriguez, the center director, pulled me aside as I was leaving. "You changed their lives, you know," she said, pressing an envelope into my hands. "But more than that, you showed them what it looks like when someone believes in themselves enough to take a risk." The envelope contained letters, dozens of them. From kids, from parents, from teachers who'd watched these children bloom under my tutoring. Words like confidence and hope and future appeared over and over again. Words no one in my family had ever used to describe what I brought to the world. I cried in my car for 20 minutes before driving home to finish packing. 3 days before I was supposed to leave, Jacob appeared on our doorstep. I was in my room, surrounded by boxes and the detritus of 18 years of being the forgotten daughter, when Isabella knocked on my door. "Elena, Jacob's here. He wants to talk to you." My hands stilled on the books I was packing. "Tell him I'm busy. He says it's important. About the engagement party." Of course it was about the engagement party. Everything was about the engagement party now. I found him in our backyard, sitting on the swing set Dad had built when Isabella and I were little. He looked tired, older somehow, like the past few weeks had aged him years. "What do you want, Jacob?" He looked up at me and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Desperation, maybe. Or regret. I called it off. For a moment, I couldn't process the words. What? The engagement? The wedding? All of it? I called it off this morning. I sat down on the swing next to him, my legs suddenly unsteady. "Jacob, what are you talking about?" "I couldn't do it. I couldn't marry Isabella when I'm in love with someone else." The words hung between us like a bridge I was afraid to cross. "Don't." "Don't what?" "Don't say things like that now, not when I'm leaving in 3 days. Maybe that's exactly when I should say them." He turned to face me fully. "Elena, I've been a coward. For months I've been hiding behind my family's expectations and my own fear. But watching you announce your scholarship that night, seeing you choose yourself when no one else would choose you, it made me realize what a fool I've been. Isabella's probably devastated." Isabella cried for about 10 minutes, then asked if this meant she could keep the engagement ring because it matches her eyes. Jacob's smile was rueful. "I think she's more upset about canceling the party than canceling the marriage." That sounded like Isabella. Drama was only interesting to her if it was happening to someone else. "So what now?" I asked. You've blown up your family's plans, broken up with my sister, and I'm still leaving for college in 3 days. Come with me. I stared at him. What? Elena, I've spent my entire life doing what was expected of me, following the path my parents laid out, making the choices they approved of, being the son they wanted instead of the person I am. He reached for my hand and I let him take it. But you're brave enough to choose yourself. You're brave enough to want something more. And I want to be brave like that too. Jacob, you can't just upend your entire life because you're impressed by my scholarship. I'm not upending my life because of your scholarship. I'm upending it because I'm in love with you. Because every conversation we've had, every text we've shared, every moment we've spent talking about books and dreams and the people we want to become. That's the most real I've ever felt. My heart was doing that painful, desperate thing again. Where would we go? Anywhere. Everywhere. I have money saved, enough for both of us to start over somewhere new. We could travel, see the world, figure out what we actually want instead of what everyone else wants for us. It was tempting. God, it was so tempting. The idea of walking away from everything, the family that had never seen me, the town that had never been big enough for my dreams, the life that had been chosen for me before I was old enough to choose for myself. But, Jacob, I said slowly, 6 months ago, you were planning to marry Isabella. 3 weeks ago, you sat in my living room and nodded when your parents suggested her as your wife. And now you want me to run away with you because you've suddenly decided you love me? It's not sudden. It feels sudden. It feels like you're choosing me now because I'm the one who's leaving, not because you genuinely want to be with me. He was quiet for a long moment. Maybe you're right. Maybe I am drawn to you because you're strong enough to leave. But Elena, what if that's exactly what love is supposed to be? Finding someone who makes you want to be braver than you thought you could be? I looked at him. Really looked at him. Jacob was handsome, wealthy, kind when it didn't cost him anything. He would have been a safe choice, an easy choice, the choice everyone would have approved of if he'd made it sooner. But I'd spent 18 years being safe. I'd spent 18 years making choices based on what other people wanted, what other people expected, what other people could handle. I'm not running away with you, Jacob. His face fell. Elena, I'm not running away with you because I'm not running away at all. I'm running toward something. Toward an education I earned, toward a future I chose, toward the person I want to become. I stood up from the swing, and I need to do that alone. You don't have to do it alone. Yes, I do. Because for the first time in my life, I'm making a choice that's entirely mine. Not influenced by family pressure or romantic feelings or what anyone else thinks I should do. Just mine. Jacob nodded slowly, and I could see him trying to understand. What about us? What about everything we talked about? Everything we shared? What about it was real, Jacob? All of it. But it was preparation, not destination. You helped me realize I was worth choosing, and now I'm choosing myself. We sat in silence for a while, watching the sun set behind the trees that had framed my childhood. In 3 days, I would pack my car and drive toward a future I could barely imagine. I would meet people who didn't know I was the smart sister, the helpful sister, the one who faded into the background. I would take classes chosen by me, make friends who chose me back, build a life that had nothing to do with anyone else's expectations. Will you write to me? Jacob asked eventually. Maybe. When I've figured out who I am when nobody's watching. And what if you figure out you want company? I smiled at him then, the first real smile I'd given him since that night in our living room when everything fell apart. Then I'll make sure I choose someone who chooses me first. The night before I left, Isabella knocked on my door one last time. I'm sorry, she said, standing in my doorway with tears in her eyes. I'm sorry I never realized. I'm sorry you felt like you had to leave. Bella, I said gently, I didn't leave because of you. I left because of me. But if Jacob hadn't chosen you first, I might never have realized I needed to choose myself. She hugged me then, fierce and desperate, and for a moment we were just sisters again. Not the beautiful one and the smart one, not the chosen one and the invisible one. Just two girls who had grown up in the same house and were finally old enough to understand that love doesn't always look the way we expect it to. The next morning, I loaded my car while my family watched from the front porch. Dad shook my hand awkwardly. Mom cried quietly into her tissue. Isabella waved until I couldn't see her anymore. As I drove away from the only home I'd ever known, I thought about all the versions of myself I was leaving behind. The girl who served tea while others planned her sister's future. The girl who tutored kids at the community center because it was the only place she felt useful. The girl who fell in love with a boy who couldn't choose her until she chose herself. I thought about the girl I was driving toward, the one who would study literature and maybe write poetry of her own, who would make friends based on shared interests instead of family obligation, who would learn that being chosen and choosing yourself weren't mutually exclusive. My phone buzzed with a text from Mia. How does it feel to be free? I pulled over at a rest stop and looked back toward the town that was already disappearing in my rearview mirror. Then I looked ahead at the highway, stretching endlessly toward my future. Like coming home to myself, I typed back. And for the first time in 18 years, I meant it.